Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. In today's video, we're going to check out the latest summon showcase. It's another Gala Dragalia, this time around starring Gala Laxi. So yes, if you played through the latest part of the campaign, you probably had a feeling she was getting an alt soon, and of course that alt is a Gala variant. We also have some summer characters, Summer Norwin, Summer Sinoa, and in the dragon slots, Summer Konohana Sakuya. So this looks like a really exciting banner from a fan service standpoint. I know many of these characters are ones that players have liked since early in the game. I'm thinking of Sinoa here in particular, but since their debut, I think that both Norwin and Laxi have been popular. And even if you're not a Laxi fan, you might be a Mascula fan, and he appears in the background of her artwork, so that's kind of sweet. I think there's a lot to like here just as a casual player and casual gamer, if you will, when it comes to Dragalia Lost. Even Konohana Sakuya has a really lovely nod to Marishiten, because you can see that little boar on her shoulder, and Marishiten's actually in the background of her portrait. So that's my fluff analysis of this banner. I'm loving it. I'm happy to see all of these characters here. And now for the more analytical part of the video, where we're going to talk about, from a gameplay standpoint, whether or not you'd want to pull on this strategically. Do you really need these characters in your collections, etc.? You know, what is their role in the meta? How would they apply, or do they even apply to endgame content? That's what we're going to focus on for the rest of this video, and basically we'll go through character by character and kind of break them down. But first I want to answer the question in the video title and the thumbnail, since I do know some people watch for that reason. So let's start there. Should you summon on this banner or not? And in general, I should say, Gala Dragalia tends to be a good time to summon. Base appearance rate for 5 stars starts at 6%, which is higher than on other types of showcases, so that's a positive. You tend to get a lot of Eldwater for summoning, at least, and you tend to get a good amount of Pity Breakers, random 5 stars. The Gala characters are often quite strong. Gala Dragons are available, there's a chance to get them. And having said all of that about why Galas are good, I think you probably should skip this one. And here's my justification. Gala Dragalias are just happening with more frequency than they used to. We had a couple weeks ago a Gala remix that brought back one of the strongest Gala adventurers ever, and probably the strongest Gala dragon. So that was Mars and Cleo, who appeared back when Summer Mikoto and Summer Patya came out. So we're just having more Galas than we did in the past. It seems like instead of every 2 months, they're happening every 2 weeks. And we don't really have a full precedent for that yet. We're going to have to wait a few more weeks to find out if that's actually going to continue. But just the precedent of one remix makes me think at some point that will happen again. And we know for sure there's going to be a Gala for the anniversary. There's probably going to be one at least at the end of every month, if nothing else. And we haven't gotten a Gala Dragon in a while, so there's a good chance at the end of August we get Gala Thor. Maybe we even get Gala Chrono. Some of these dragons we have not seen get a Gala incarnation, maybe Gala Chthonius, who knows. So I really think those are the Gala banners you want to look for when there's a high power dragon, and these Gala banners in between may or may not be worth it depending on what your collection looks like and the specific characters who are introduced. My evaluation of this initially is that nothing here is really a game changer as far as current high difficulty content. So that's why I think you probably should skip this one and save up for the next really, really lucrative Gala. Having said that, I know if you're a Norwin fan or a Sinoa stan, you're going to summon. I mean, you're going to enjoy it. You're probably going to summon and go for it. So I wish you luck if that's what you decide to do. I will probably resist temptation and skip. I mean, I really want Norwin most of all here. And from a gameplay standpoint, I really think Sakuya is very, very interesting. But we'll get into that as we discuss each of the characters specifically. That's my answer for this time around. I think you should not summon on this one. So let's begin with the showcase info, and first thing I should say is that this banner does last a few days, so Gala banners are short, but you have some time. You can wait till the end, see what's coming next. They've gotten better at interspersing good banners with filler banners, which makes it harder to predict whether, 2 banners from now will be a time you really wish you had some Wormite or not. But as you can see here, none of the summer things are limited or seasonal in any way. They're going to be part of the permanent pool, so don't worry about that. But let's begin. We're going to look through Laxi, then Sinoa, then Norwin, and finally we'll end things off with Konohana Sakuya, which I feel is appropriate because I think she may have the most implications here as far as meta goes. So let's begin with Gala Laxi. Alright, so she is a flame dagger, and her quote is, "A compassionate heart," and then Mascula, who you can see in the background there, says, "The courage to fight," and together they say, "Eden mode, activate." So she is a flame dagger, but I'll play on screen now. Her basic attacks are not like those of regular dagger units. They're actually different. She has special combos. There's even a variant on her combos, so keep in mind she's not going to play like a traditional dagger if that's what you're in for. Unfortunately, it's another case where this isn't mentioned anywhere in her kit or description, so unless you look this up, which I did over on the Twitter for the game, you would not know this information. So I don't like it when that happens, but honestly it happens increasingly. I do like it that they play differently, but I wish they would be more upfront about how that works. Now, the trade-off to that is it would often mean really long ability descriptions, which I know people are not a fan of either. So that's just sort of how it is. You have to sometimes look up information on these characters. It's not the most esoteric part of the game by any means. There's way more crazy things happening. But all that to say, she is a flame dagger, but she does play a little bit differently. Let's read her skills. Her first skill is called Code 14 Conviction. Second skill is called Eden Mode. Her first is shareable, with a shared skill point cost of 5. So as you can see, this deals flame damage, and if it's used when you're in Eden mode, a variant called Eden Code 5 Gavura will be used instead. Eden Code 5 Gavura does flame damage as well, but it also inflicts burn. So if you're not familiar with this, Gavura and Code 5, I guess, Gavura is sort of the 5th stage in the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah, and it's one of the Sephiroths on the Tree of Life. So Gavura represents flame. I don't know much else about it. I had to look it up because I saw that, and I was like, this is definitely a reference that I recall from somewhere, but what is it? I don't know that there's a Code 14 Conviction or a 14th element to the Tree of Life in Kabbalah. Yeah, I'm not sure about where they get that from because I think there's only 10, but we'll see another element in just a second when we read Eden Mode. So this one grants you the Fig effect and activates Eden Mode for 20 seconds. During that mode, Fig automatically attacks foes. It's kind of like a little sentry bot that kind of floats and just fires lasers at enemies. That's what it looks like from the gameplay footage over on Twitter. And this automatic damage is not treated as skill damage. If this skill is used during Eden Mode, a variant called Eden Code 1 Kater will be used instead. And Eden Code 1 Kater deals flame damage to enemies directly ahead. Hopefully my Hebrew pronunciation is decent, but I can't really say it's likely because I called Laxi Laxi for the longest time, so all bets are off on my pronunciation, but basically this alternates between providing you the Eden Mode buff, where you get a little Autobot that will fire lasers at the enemy, and then when you're in Eden Mode, being another damage-dealing skill, this time referring to the crown of the Tree of Life, or the first element of it. So, interesting. I mean, a lot of this is going to depend on, how good the Eden Mode is, how good the Fig attack bot is, and looking on the wiki as of now, the damage modifiers to me do not look to be particularly exciting. When I see over 2,000, over 3,000, I start to, I raise my eyebrows a little bit. That starts to appeal to me. These days, when you see the 1,200 range on a low SP cost skill, sure, it can be good, 12 to 1,600, whatever it may be, but I think that we've seen really strong adventurers, or especially Mana Spiral adventurers, like think of Vice, or think of Ronzel's skill after Mana Spiral. It's so good, and it's hard to kind of compensate for that with some of these lower damage skills, even if the SP cost isn't too bad. So all that to say, I have no idea how her actual DPS will stack up when you simulate her. The SP cost and the damage modifier are just one element of things, obviously, but to me, it didn't look particularly strong. So let's look at her co-ability. This is interesting. She has the same co-ability as Tiki, so Tiki's no longer unique in that regard. They both happen to be daggers with this special co-ability. And she has this Chain Co ability that gives her wind res. I can't say this is especially remarkable. I can't imagine this being particularly important for anything. Her abilities are Resonant Hearts 2, Mana Kiln 2, and Critical Frenzy 2. So let's start with Resonant Hearts. This is going to give her a charge gauge with 3 bars. The charge gauge fills with standard attacks, 4 strikes, and dash attacks, so basically anything but your skills. And it gives you cumulative buffs based on how many of those bars you filled up. When you filled up 1 bar, you get 20% defense, second bar, 15% skill damage, and all 3 bars, 15% strength on top of those other buffs. The charge gauge will not fill when you have the Fig effect, and the gauge will be reset and all of the above buffs lost when the Fig effect is removed. So, let's go back up here and take a look at this. She's going to have the Fig effect and Eden mode for 20 seconds, and her Fig is going to automatically attack enemies. When that runs out and the Fig is removed, all of these buffs are going to be lost. The gauge is reset. But when the Fig is active, they're not going to fill either. So if you only had 2 buffs and then you activate your Fig, you're never going to be able to get up to 3. So it seems like the likely right thing to do with her would be to get all 3 bars filled, then activate Eden mode. So for the duration of Eden mode, you're staying at your 3 bars, and when your Fig is lost, you're going to go back down to 0, but that's okay, you'll slowly charge up again over time. That's my intuition on how you'd want to play her. Let's look at Mana Kiln now. Mana Kiln 2 reduces susceptibility to stun and sleep by 100%. I think this is actually the main reason you might want this character. And it sounds crazy, but I think that there's a possibility that maybe Gala Laxi is useful for you somehow in your particular comp or your variant of solo or perhaps even auto Master Volk's Wrath. And I think that that's the one content that is pretty hard to crack in solo. It's doable in solo. I don't know if it's been done in auto by the time I'm making this video, but it certainly would seem to be a challenge. One of the challenges might be with the resistances, and right now the only character who can really deal with both stun and sleep is Cerise. That's by no means the only challenge, especially for an auto. You have to deal with all the drain life that's happening. But I think that this is actually rare enough compared to some other elements, like for instance in Wind you have Templar Hope, who's not even a Gala character, who has dual resistances, right? I think this is rare enough to actually be somewhat interesting here. I wouldn't be surprised if it could be relevant, but that's not really a fight I play too much these days, so I'm not sure. She has Critical Frenzy 2, increases critical rate by 4% for every 15 hit combo, up to 3 times per combo. So I think what that means is if you get up to 45 hits, you're going to get 12% total. If you get up to 60 from there, you're not going to get up to 16. It's going to stay at 12. And then you also get 4% on the critical damage modifier each time you land a critical hit, up to 10 times per combo. So again, that's in a consecutive sequence of attacks. A combo is basically a consecutive sequence of attacks, however long the duration, I guess, in this case. So let's say you attack 30 times, you landed 10 critical hits in there, and you attack 30 more times, you're never going to get more than a 40% bonus from this to your critical damage. And in addition, after activating, the critical damage increase will not activate again for 1 second, so you have to kind of stagger your critical hits, or just keep comboing and eventually you'll hit the cap on it. These buffs are removed when the combo counter resets, so she would certainly like combo time, chain co abilities. I think Nobunaga's an obvious pairing with her. And actually, Ezlith's probably a reasonable pairing as well, because they have different regular co abilities, technically, even though they're both flame daggers. She has standard attack damage, and Ezlith has critical damage, so they would actually make for good company. Overall, I think Gala Laxi is probably going to be a fun character to play. Her basic attacks look really sweet. The Fig thing is interesting. It's a fun little gimmick for her. But I really don't think she's anything too special. I could be wrong. I'm open to being wrong. You know, Gala Mars can transform anything into a terrifying monster these days in the flame element, so I don't think she's weak or bad, but I don't think that she's as busted as, say, Marth, for example. I feel like she's maybe like Nadine level, so very strong, workable in any team. You'd invite her to play with you, a lot better than regular Laxi. but I'm not seeing anything here that's like, oh, this is going to change the way we approach things. Okay, let's continue and talk about Summer Sinoa next. Summer Sinoa looking fantastic. Vacation, huh? Can't wait to see how this experiment works out. I love Sinoa. I think she's such a fan favorite from the beginning of the game because of the wackiness and randomness to her play style. And of course, her personality is bombastic to say the least. But she's just a great character, mad scientist. I love that she's a part of this event. I can't wait to see her participation or involvement in the story. Well, let's talk about her skills. Chrono Trial is her first skill, and the second one is Bracing Summer. So Chrono Trial creates almost like a black hole that deals wind damage to the target and nearby enemies. It draws them together, causes poison, and then you get an overload stack on Sinoa. Overload is actually a debuff on Sinoa that's going to make it so that the next time you want to use Chrono Trial, it charges up more slowly. Your skill gauge fill rate goes down by 30%, and you can get up to 3 stacks of Overload. It also can't be removed by shapeshifting, and I think when you share the skill for its shared skill cost of 6 points, I don't think Overload even comes into play at all. I think they just ignore that. So why you might care about Overload is partially her second skill, Bracing Summer. This one consumes all stacks of Overload, which is good because it's a debuff, and applies one of the following buffs at random to the user for each stack of Overload consumed. So buff 1 is Inspiration by 2 stages, buff 2 is 15% to critical damage for 30 seconds, and buff 3 is 20% to critical rate for 30 seconds. The same buff will not be granted multiple times by one use of the skill, so even though they're random, it's sampling without replacement, if that makes sense. So when you draw something out of the bag, it's not going to go back into the bag to be selected again within one use of the skill. However, if you use this when you have your full 3 stacks of Overload, you get all 3 buffs, and they are applied to the entire team. And if you don't have any stacks of Overload, you're still going to get one random buff. It's just not going to get rid of or consume any stacks, obviously, because you don't have any. So, I think this is really fun. They're playing in Sinoa's space of random buffs, which I like. There's also an interesting dynamic here between the Overload on Chrono Trial being kind of a debuff. Chrono Trial, by the way, looks strong. It actually looks very powerful for its SP cost. I think it had like 1600 damage modifier before poison or something, which is pretty good. I think even though it's not in that 2 to 3k range, it's an area of effect. It looks really strong. It manipulates enemy movement. So it looks like an exciting skill to me. But then the way it works with Bracing Summer is quite cool, where you want to probably get all 3 stacks so you can buff your entire team. But maybe there are times when you would use Bracing Summer sooner. It's a little hard to say. I think the way it would play out would be you'd likely always just want to buff the entire team. I don't know exactly the SP cost breaks for Chrono Trial, so how negative is that 30% skill haste reduction or skill gauge fill rate reduction? I can't put a solid number on it, but you could always run Summer Sinoa with, say, Ariel, and thereby increase your skill haste to kind of offset that. That seems like a reasonable possibility if you want to focus on getting out as many buffs as possible through Bracing Summer. Let's keep looking at the rest of her kit. So she is like a normal wand, has the skill damage co-ability, and then for a chain co-ability, she has poison equals user water res. Again, kind of negligible. These things do sort of matter in auto comp sometimes, like it can make a tangible difference, but it's really hard to say. And as for her abilities, she has Determination 2, Freeze Res, and then skill damage of 30%. The latter two, pretty self-explanatory. But let's look at Determination. Increases damage dealt by the skill Chrono Trial based on the number of Overload stacks the user has. The first stack gives you an increase of 20%, and additional stacks increase the damage by 5% each. Okay, so this to me fits into the play pattern I described earlier, where it would make sense to go ahead and keep your 3 Overload stacks. Every time you use Chrono Trial, it's going to get a little stronger, and then you could use them all or expend them all on a big Bracing Summer that would help the entire team. The fact that the buffs are 30 seconds is super nice. I can imagine she's going to want buff skill time. I think that's probably going to be good, or at least desirable on her. You know, maybe you could run her with proper maintenance for both strength and buff skill time, or there's always a Dog's Day, which gives wind skill haste as well as buff time. So I think there are a lot of ways to probably build Sinoa, and that's a question I have is, what will be the most lucrative? You know, how much of her damage comes from team buffs versus comes from just her damage on Chrono Trial, her first skill. And I think Chrono Trial will not end up being negligible in the end, because it does look pretty decent, but the team buffs here are pretty nice. And I'm glad she doesn't play in strength space, because strength is pretty saturated as far as buff bots go and wins. You know, you have Melody, you have Noelle, you have Tobias, so she's occupying the same space as Dragon Mule Zane here a little bit, but I think that's fine. Okay, let's take a look at Summer Norwin next, and then I'll double back a little bit on both of these characters to talk about their role in the end game since they're both wind element. Let us dive into a story together. I think he looks fantastic. I was a little bit torn on the tie-off here on the shirt, but I remembered, obviously he's a Sylvan, so he has to show the midriff, but I love the hat, and I love his hair. His floof is great. Okay, let's read about him. Skills include Summer Memories, which is shareable at a cost of 7, and Ephemeral Love. Pretty wordy skills, but they're a little easier to parse once you know what's going on. In this case, he, like most daggers, has the critical rate co-ability, and we'll get into the rest of his kit after that, after we read through the skills. So Summer Memories has Skill Shift. It deals wind damage to the target and nearby enemies, and basically your skill shift phases increase the amount of damage dealt. So phase 2 does more than phase 1, phase 3 does more than phase 2, but phase 4 does not deal damage and instead removes all stacks of Doleful Spirit applied by Ephemeral Love 4 and energizes the entire team. Okay, so now let's read Ephemeral Love. Same deal here, deals wind damage to the target and nearby enemies, and you have skill shift for both skills at once. Phases 2 and 3 increase the amount of damage dealt, similar thing to his first skill. Phase 4 inflicts poison on foes and inflicts 1 stack of Doleful Spirit on the user, up to a maximum of 4 stacks. While the user has 1 or more stacks of Doleful Spirit, their energy level will not increase, and using this skill during phase 4 will cause them to take damage. The more stacks of Doleful Spirits the user has, the more damage they will take. Stacks of Doleful Spirits will not be removed by shapeshifting. Alright, very, very weird. We haven't had linked skill shift in this way before. The closest thing I can think of is like Alex's skill chains, which really interplay with each other, Gala Alex. But I'm honestly not completely sure how this works, because let's say you're using Summer Memories and you use the phase 3 version of this. Does Ephemeral Love bump up from phase 2 to phase 3 automatically, even if you haven't used the phase 2 one yet? Or does it not? If it bumps both of them up simultaneously, then I would imagine you probably want to alternate between these, so it works out so that you use Doleful Spirit once, and then you cleanse Doleful Spirit the next time with Ephemeral Love 4, but it's a little hard to read. What I did notice over on the wiki was that these have the same SP cost, which I thought was kind of interesting, or at least it appeared that way. That could be just a filler value for now, but it looked like they have the same SP cost, which means they're charging at the same rate. You're kind of alternating between them, if that pans out to be correct. So yeah, a little hard to read. Obviously involved with poison, but it's only on the 4th use, or when you're in phase 4, so a little slower to get out than other characters who utilize poison. And the damage mods looked okay, but I mean, they looked okay, especially by the end, but I didn't see anything that was like, oh, this is busted, or this is something that is like a must-have. I see this Norwin as like, if you're a Norwin fan, you know, you're probably going to want this Norwin. He seems great. But anyway, chain go ability, wins above 10 hits equals HP regen of 6, so you get a small amount of regen, but for doing combos, that's kind of cool, because I think we've only seen regen before for HP 60% or below, I want to say, or maybe it's 40% or below. That would probably make more sense. But yeah, we haven't seen a substantially useful regen chain co ability, and to be frank, this is probably going to be a small one as well, but you never know. And we'll talk about that in a second. I don't want to get to that just yet, but you never know how this may be able to be used for Ciela. Okay, so abilities: energy equals skill haste 3, increases the user's skill gauge fill rate as their energy level increases. The maximum bonus given when the user is energized is 25%. This is very odd to me because your only way to get energy out of Norwin's kits is phase 4 of Summer Memories, and it's going to give you a full energize, which means 5 stacks of energies. Both of these skills deal damage in most of their phases anyway. They deal damage, so you're going to immediately or very quickly use up your energy stacks. I don't think he has enough ways to get energy, and I don't even think there are enough ways to get energy in the wind element to fully take advantage of him there. So I think this is one of the weaker abilities that he has, the weakest for sure, and one of the weaker abilities we've seen in a long time, actually. Alright, Freeze Res, Poison Punisher, kind of the usual here. What I wanted to say about the Chain Co ability earlier, and to get back to Sinoa, is sort of the implications for these for the end game, because right now, of course, we have High Mercury's trial pretty much played out, I would say. Like, there are a lot of ways to do expert. It's probably the easiest expert to get into within the triangle of elements of wind, flame, and water. But you can do it with anyone. I mean, there are plenty of characters who can clear it. Maybe you can solo it. There's lots of different ways you can play it. Master difficulty is, or was, in kind of a split meta where a lot of players preferred to play with 3 Hawks and a Tobias or other buff bots so that they could very quickly clear the trial. I don't know that many players actually do that trial these days, but for those who are still playing that, that was one of the more popular comps last I checked, and there was also an earlier comp which basically involved a couple Wellies, a Noelle, and a Victor most often. So with them both having freeze res, I actually think it's a significant liability against High Mercury. If you're going to do explosive damage and end the fight immediately, then it's not really a big deal, it doesn't really matter. But the longer the fight goes on, the more likely your freeze res is to possibly become a liability. If you played super well, it may not matter, but the bursting bubbles in particular can bog you, and those bogs can make it so that you can't escape the whirlpool phase, even if you know the patterns really well. So I don't think either of them are really ideal for that, but you could imagine like a Chocolatiers Force Charge Sinoa, and maybe, you set her up in such a way that you very quickly get a full team bracing Summer, but you would need to use Chrono Trial 3 times, not just 2 times, and that's the challenge, because from the Chocolatiers you get once, right? From Force Charge you can get a second use, but where are you going to get your third use from? I think that's the question. If you can get a third use, then suddenly your Chocolatiers up bracing Summer does something meaningful, but I don't think she would really be able to replace Tobias particularly well in that comp. I mean, she might be able to do it just fine, because really Tobias can kind of flail around a bit. You could still clear perfectly well, but yeah, I think he's probably the better candidate for that particular job. And as for Norwin, Norwin, again, having freeze res, it's a bit of a drawback. He wouldn't obviously fit into that comp, but he can be the baiter. Like, Tobias does a small amount of baiting, maybe like once in the mash, because usually you do see 1 dash from High Mercury. And again, he seems like a character who's slower because you have to get through these different phases. So I don't think he would really do much of anything. I can't imagine him being particularly desirable there. Now, when it comes to Ciela, this is where I think things get interesting. This Chain Co ability actually looks kind of intriguing to me because the auto battle comps are based around just having stacks of regen, like ridiculous stacks of regen, super defensive teams, and I don't know, I think that he might be able to slot in. It doesn't seem particularly likely, like those team slots are pretty tight, and there's lots of good options for survivability, like Silas. Silas is great, strength debuff, HP co ability, Ronzel, Dispel, which makes the fight go a little faster, defense co-ability, good damage. So I don't think it's likely, but I think you could probably make a comp work. And as for Sinoa, she would probably be really fun to use against Ciela, but yeah, again, if you're playing just the normal fight of Ciela, anybody can do anything. I mean, you could use anybody. You could throw Freya on her, though, which is kind of cool in comps that really want all 3, or want 4 DPS units, I should say, which is really like 3 plus a buff bot. You could probably throw her in against, instead of Tobias. I don't think you would necessarily clear faster or do particularly better, but you could do it. I think you would be just fine. So yeah, she seems sweet. I mean, it would be fun to play with her. I think the randomness is a little lost because if you're getting up to 3 overload stacks, then you're getting all the buffs, but nonetheless, I think she'd be a fun character to use. So neither of them, again, similar theme with Laxi, neither of them has an obvious fit or would be an obvious upgrade or make things consistently better or easier to do. And now let's finally move on and talk about Konohana Sakuya, Summer Konohana Sakuya, I should say. I bring you tidings from the water's edge. She looks fantastic, and the main thing I wanted to point out, which I did earlier, just look at how cute. Look at how cute this little boar is, and Marushi-ten in the background. I think that's just a lovely touch. Anyway, as for what she does, she's one of the most unique dragons we've seen in a long time. Her skill is Seashore Dance. It restores her HP slightly, or your HP slightly, since when you're a dragon, obviously your HP is kind of irrelevant in most content anyway, and grants the user a Smiling Flower. The Summer Flower's ability buffs the user based on the number of Smiling Flowers they have up to a maximum of 6 stacks. Alright, and what Summer Flowers does is, if the user is attuned to wind, grants the user a Smiling Flower at the start of quests, so you get 1 for free, and an additional Smiling Flower every 60 seconds up to a maximum of 6. Okay, interesting. So, the user will receive the following buffs based on the number of total Smiling Flowers. If you have 1 flower, which you get for free, increase strength by 40%. So that's your baseline with this dragon. It's a 40% strength dragon. 60 seconds into the fight, you're going to get your second flower, and then you're also going to have 20% extra defense. If you last 2 minutes into the fight, you're going to have 50% extra skill damage, and now we're really talking about something kind of good here, right? 50% skill damage, 40% strength, relatively decent combination. I mean, it's no value for many characters, but for some, 40% strength plus 50% skill damage is very, very good, maybe even better. And then 4 flowers, so at this point you've gotten through a lot of content. Most content doesn't last this long unless you're in the end game, but at that point it would reduce water damage taken by 5%. And finally, 6 flowers is it grants an HP regen buff. So here's my thinking with this and why this dragon probably excites me more than anything on the banner. Auto battle team comps for Ciela aren't always really fast. In fact, they kind of drag on in some cases. I think this could actually be a really good auto battle dragon. You have defense, you have resistance. Eventually you get HP regen for some extra security at the end of the fight. Like, I think that this could actually be the best auto battle dragon we've seen. Maybe in the game, but in a long time. The fact that you accumulate buffs the longer the fight goes on is really funny. It changes the dynamics of the fight in a way that's kind of interesting. But for anything co-op, I would probably never use this dragon, unfortunate as it is, unless Master Ciela's Wrath ends up being really hard or really tanky and it takes a long amount of minutes to clear and you're getting a lot of these buffs. You really, I think the cutoff, or like the point you have to get to is the 3 flowers. So you're going to need to be 2 minutes into the fight to get the 3 flowers because you start with 1 for free. But you also, I don't know if this is if this makes sense, but you need to get to that point and then actually have the fight go on long enough to utilize that. So you probably want it to be at least a 4-minute fight so that like at least half of the time you had your full bonus from this dragon. But a lot of the fights just don't last that long. So I don't know how good Konohana Sakuya actually is in co-op, but for single player, I would be excited to try her. I actually kind of want to summon her. It's just hard to dedicate Sunlight Stones to anything that isn't a Gala Dragon right now. And even though Gala Dragons aren't always the best in all types of content, as we've kind of gotten a sense for with Cat Sith from what I've heard, I still think that they're probably the safest investments as far as your Sunlight Stones. Anyway, y'all, we've spent a lot of time today going through everything. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was fun to talk about the new characters. I always like getting to read through their kits and discuss and learn about what they do. Let me know what your experience has been like if you've summoned any of these characters, and if I'm off on any of these initial opinions. Are these characters game changers? Is there any content where you're absolutely loving what they have to offer? I'd be very curious to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, everyone, that is going to do it for this video. So, thank you as always for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.